On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Kirill Kaprizov had himself a year in 2023-2024, and now all eyes are on the future.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms, or both, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we review the 2023-2024 season for Kirill Kaprizov. We'll hand out our letter grades, and we'll give you the outlook for what is to come next for Kirill Kaprizov. And I'll give you a hint. That's a pretty important topic for the Minnesota Wild here over the next few seasons. So just looking at the entire body of work for Kaprizov, you can really honestly boil it down to two parts of the season. You've got the first part of the year in which it is very clear that Kirill was trying to work his way back into game shape. And we've talked about this. Denny was in on this pretty quickly in terms of Kaprizov basically using the first 20 games of the year as his warm-up, because he spent the entire offseason trying to rehab from the injury that he sustained last year. And so he was not able to put in the same amount of work, same amount of preparation that he typically does in getting himself ready for the season. And so it was a feeling out process for Kirill through the first 20-ish games of the year, trying to get his legs back under him, trying to get himself into playing shape, all of those things. And so I think we're all on the same page that first 20 games of the season was it took him that much to just get back to his normal level of play. He also missed time this year due to a rib injury. And so you go with the Dean Evison tenure, which was up until November 26th. Kaprizov had 6 goals, 12 assists, 18 total points in those 19 games. And so it's not like he was majorly like a no-show during those first 20 games, but it was noticeable. He just was not able to do the same things that we've seen him do season to season. And so you couple that with the time missed due to the rib injury, thanks to Brendan Dillon, and then you go from that to what he did from basically the time that John Hines took over to the end of the season. And Kaprizov, by the way, those 18 points, that was good for 59th in the NHL during those first 19 games. So he was still playing as, a top 60 player in the league. It just was very noticeable that he wasn't able to do the same things that we are accustomed to him doing. From that point on, from November 27th to the end of the league, or end of the year, Kirill was the 7th most prolific scoring player in the entirety of the NHL. 78 points, was tied with Leon Draisaitl in the final 56 games that he played. His 78 points were only bested by David Pastrnak, Austin Matthews, Artemi Panarin, Connor McDavid, Nikita Kucherov, and Nathan McKinnon. Those are the only players that had more points from November 27th on than Kirill. And from a goals perspective, Kirill had the 5th most goals in that span, 40 in the final 56 games. Only bested by Zach Hyman, Nathan McKinnon, Sam Reinhart, and Austin Matthews. So once Kirill got himself right, got himself figured out, he was a top 10 player in the league the rest of the season. He carried the Minnesota Wild through the entire rest of the season. And at times, he looked better than he ever has, and which has led to, some talk on this show during the season. Is this the best body of work that Kirill Kaprizov has put together this season compared to the other 4 that he's played? He was on about 120-point pace in the final 50 games of the season. And so going into the offseason, and we'll talk about the expectations coming up, going into the offseason, now fully healthy, he is primed for a monster season. Monster season for this Minnesota Wild team. The overall body of work and how we're going to do this is we're going to look at kind of where Kaprizov ranks amongst the Minnesota Wild as a team. We'll do this for every player too, where they stand amongst the rest of the team. But I'll give you a hint. He's a leader in just about every category on this team. All told, Kaprizov finished the season in 75 games played. He had 46 goals, which was one off of his career high. He had 50 assists, which was the second most he's ever had in a season. He had 96 points, the second most he's ever had in a season. He had 27 even strength goals. Again, second most he's ever had in a season. 19 power play goals is a new career high. 8 game-winning goals, a new career high. Overall power play points, he had 22 power play assists, which is a career high. Shots on goal, 277, second most since 2021-2022. Shooting percentage was a career high. Time on ice was a career high. Blocked shots was a career high. He had 55 hits in 75 games, 38 takeaways, and 73 giveaways. And the statistics beyond that just continue to blow your mind. Corsi for percentage, something that we've talked about on this show, it basically calculates the percentage of time at which a team controls the puck. Corsi events are things like shots on goal. And so the higher percentage your Corsi for percentage is, means that the higher amount of the events that are going on are the Minnesota Wild doing them. The Minnesota Wild with Kirill Kaprizov on the ice had a 62.4% Corsi for percentage. So 62% of the time, if there was a shot on goal, it was the Wild. That's the second highest Kirill has ever had in a season. Last year was the highest mark, and he had just a ton more volume in that area. So a ton more Corsi events between last year and this year. In terms of goals per 60 minutes, he was at 1.7, assists per 60 minutes, 1.9, points per 60 minutes, 3.6, which was a career high. But you look at some of the other numbers too. On ice goals 4, and even 5 per 60. On ice goals against was at 2.7, that's not bad. And it speaks to, I think, some of his line pairings as the season wore on. Some of the other numbers that I want to take a look at here as well is point shares. Kaprizov was worth 9.2 offensive point shares this season. That's the second most he's ever had. Defensive point shares for Kaprizov, 2.3, which is a career high. And he had 11.4 total point shares, which basically is what Kaprizov in himself is doing to contribute to the points that the team earned throughout the season. So Kaprizov was worth over 11 points in the standings by himself this season, which is the second most ever to his 2021-2022 season. Beyond that, expected goals for of 59.4 was a career high. Expected goals against of 50.1 was the most ever, but the expected plus minus at 9.3 was also very respectable. There was another number that I wanted to point out here too that just blew my mind. With Kirill on the ice, here it is. With Kaprizov on the ice, the Minnesota Wild outscored their opponents 136-74 this season, which is it's insane. And we heard all those numbers down the stretch this past season about how of the last 90 goals scored, Kaprizov was responsible for either directly or via assist, was responsible for something like 56 of them. Just insane numbers for Kirill Kaprizov that he was able to put together. And really, as we'll talk about, really hard to knock him for anything this season, even with the slow start through the first 20 games of the year. And so when we come back, we will take a look at the letter grades, or in this case, the number grades. We're going 1 through 5 in key categories, and that will determine what Kaprizov's letter grade is for the season. So we'll take a look at the grades for Kirill Kaprizov as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off. We're going to talk more about Monopoly Go here. And I know what you're saying. Hey, flag on the play. You already talked about Monopoly Go. There's just so much good going on in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. I was playing this morning before going to work, and I was able to grab myself 450 spins of the dice just by completing a couple of mini games. That's going to come in handy for the rest of the day. There's so much to win, such as unique stickers, cool new playing pieces, or hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or you heist their vaults. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now. Free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, the draft lottery is this evening, 5:30 Central Time, I do believe, is when the ping pong balls will be selected. We'll have reaction to that for you tomorrow. Taking a look at, if the Wild moved up, there's a 90% chance that they don't. There's a small percentage chance they move back. There is a 2% chance that they jump up in the lottery. So we'll examine the repercussions of that for tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild. We'll also have a little draft talk for you as well. What are the letter grades for Kirill Kaprizov's season? And we're going on a scale of 1 through 5, offense, defense, special teams, and we'll factor in the fan voting for both YouTube and Twitter. And then we'll also factor in just kind of how a player factors into the leadership of the team, 1 through 5 as well. So let's go to the offense. I got to give Kaprizov a 5 here because even with the slow start, the fact that he was within the top 10 in the NHL in the final 56 games of the season is impressive enough is impressive enough on its own. But then you also have to factor in the fact that basically nobody else was scoring, with the exception of Matt Boldy and Joel Eriksson Ek down the stretch. He was basically the only one doing anything. In critical moments, like this team was battling for a playoff spot until the final couple of weeks of the season. He was the one getting almost all of the goals. And so the fact that he was able to do that, and the fact that he was able to even put this team in potential to grab a wild card spot until they just could not overcome all the inconsistencies and everything. It's got to be a 5. And honestly, I know people have mentioned, like, you got to factor in that first 20 games of the season. And there's been some, like, maybe you go from an A to an A minus. Honestly, it would be like me saying, okay, I'm not going to give him 100% on the season. I'm going to give him like a 97. Like it's a percentage points drop for the slow start because he more than made up for it the rest of the way. And so going to give him a 5 for the offense because he is the offense for this team. Defensively, honestly, those defensive metrics for Kaprizov, the fact that he was playing a large majority of the back half of the season with Joel Eriksson Ek, I'm going to give Kaprizov a 3.5 defensively. He's not relied upon to do a ton defensively, obviously. Like he's not playing penalty kill at all. But the fact that he had a career high in defensive point shares, the fact that while he was on the ice was responsible for just 2.7 goals per 60 minutes. That kind of stuff, I think, speaks to the fact that he is starting to improve defensively a little bit, or is able to not be, what's the best way to phrase this? He's not like a liability out there defensively, and career high in blocked shots, still levying hits out there. I'm going to give him a 3.5 out of 5, while also saying that, like, defense is definitely not the reason that Kaprizov is on the team. And from a special teams perspective, it's got to be a 5, because if he is not scoring on that power play, nobody is. Like, career high, franchise record for power play goals in a season with 19. And he had 41 power play points this past season. Just unbelievable. He's the straw that stirs the drink, special teams wise, offense wise. And so you got to give him full marks there, because he's one of the handful of players on this team that, like, what do you point to as an area that he needs to improve? Like, he is an impact, he's a high impact, game breaking type player. And yes, those players are going to get shut down periodically. You see it happen to the likes of McKinnon and McDavid. They get shut down periodically, but consistently throughout the season, Kaprizov just completely put the team on his back. In fact, let's just go through here, and I'll go to the game on the 28th. That was John Hines' debut. 27th was when he took over. That game against the Blues was the first game in which he didn't have a point. He had 2 games in a row without a point, like 4 out of 5 games without a point between the 7th of December and the 16th of December. Beyond that, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games the entire rest of the season. And we're talking in December. he had 8 games the rest of the season in which he didn't record a point. That's it. And that first game that John Hines took over, that was game number 20 of the season. So he had 8 games without a point in the final 62. The impact is always there. He is a threat every time he possesses the puck. I guess if you had one gripe about what he could improve upon is shooting more. Like being the one that is selfish enough to take more shots. That's about it. That's about all you can point to with Kaprizov at this point in his career, which is why what happens next with Kirill is something that is going to be felt by this franchise for years to come, either way. So we'll talk about the future of Kirill Kaprizov here in Minnesota as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild. And as I say that, I realize the one thing that I forgot to do. Let's just take a look at the voting for Kaprizov's letter grade. 91 votes on Twitter were cast, and 70.3% said A, 25.3% said a B for Kaprizov's grade. Then there were 1.1% of the responses said C, 3.3% were trolling, said a D or an F. Jeremy on Twitter saying slow start, but still an A. Big Red, A, obviously 96 points. Robo had 80. That competition is over and done with, which I agree. And Jacob, the fact anyone thinks he deserves a C or a D or an F is crazy. On YouTube, we had this for a reaction for Kaprizov's overall letter grade for the season. Just getting back to it here. 82% said A, 17% said B, and we had 2% that said C. 119 total votes on YouTube, so 80% of them said A. Let's take a look at the comments here from the people. Trav, 96 points in 74 games playing with Slappies, A+. Amanda, honestly, I'm wanting to give him an A-. He started extremely slow. I don't think we have seen a full 100% season from him yet. He can and will continue to just impress. Steamroller would have had 50 goals, 100 points if he played every game. Played injured at the start of the season, so probably has an even higher ceiling. Bro's an all-star. Carried the Wild as far as he could down the stretch. A+. Denny Kaprizov will score 60 this coming year if he stays healthy. Michael Grousum, 8749, a duh for A. Yeah, I think the people have spoken. Kirill Kaprizov gets an A for the 2023-2024 season. Now, what does the future hold? We'll finish by discussing that here on today's episode of Locked on Wild. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, it is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. If you are not in the state of Minnesota and are a Timberwolves fan, how about a $5 bet on Friday's game against the Denver Nuggets? Be a great way to get started because Target Center is going to be rocking. Wolves have throttled Denver so far in the first 2 games of the series. So that would be a great opportunity for you to cash in on some bonus bets that you can use throughout the rest of the weekend or the rest of round 2 in the NBA and the NHL. Either way, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you join us on Discord if you have not already. We keep the conversation going all throughout the week. Link is in the description. Also, make sure to subscribe and follow us on social media as well. We have a lot of content that we throw at you throughout the week. So just make sure that you are up to speed on everything going on with the Minnesota Wild. This, folks, this honestly is really the only thing that matters with this Minnesota Wild franchise over the next couple of seasons. We know that Kirill Kaprizov has 2 more years on his current deal. We know that he gets a no-move clause effective on July 1st. And you have a situation here that is going to impact this franchise regardless of how it plays out. If Kaprizov opts to not stay, if he opts to go somewhere else, doesn't think that this team has what it takes to make the postseason consistently or to win a Stanley Cup, if he decides that he needs to go elsewhere, you are going to have a massive amount of fans that get rightfully angry about that. Because in the 4 short years that Kirill Kaprizov has been playing, he has rewritten almost every record that exists for this franchise. That should tell you everything you need to know about the type of player that he is and the just the watchability that he brings to this franchise by simply being on the ice. He is somebody that you watch every single time he has the puck, every single time he's on the ice. And if you don't show him that you are committed to making him the focal point, and it's not even about making him the focal point. Like, let me backtrack a little bit. By putting around him what is necessary to contend with the Dallases, the Colorados, the Vegases, if you don't show him that you're capable of putting players around him that can turn this team into a legitimate contender, then you're going to run the risk of him wanting to go elsewhere, wanting to try to do it somewhere else. Now, we're seeing this play out with Anthony Edwards in the Minnesota Timberwolves a little bit. It is possible that some players just are wired a little differently to where they don't see the appeal of the bigger cities. Like, they kind of like the fact that they can fly under the radar a little bit, because at the end of the day, the money's the same, with the exception of the taxes here in the state. But like, if you convince Kaprizov, if he is willing to stay, if he's willing to sign an extension after his current deal is done, then you have somebody who at bare minimum is worth tuning in to watch every single night he's on the ice. Because every single night he's on the ice, there is potential for him to do something you've never seen. That's not something that this franchise has been able to say that they have had a ton of. You've had solid players that have played on this roster. You've got Marian Gaborik, who was an exciting player to say the least, but this is different. Kirill Kaprizov is leagues above what this franchise has had throughout their tenure. And so these next 2 seasons are all about showing Kirill that you are doing everything within your power to put this team in as competitive of a spot as it can be. And That's all I'll say is the ripple effect either way will be felt for a long time by this franchise. So as far as what can we get from, what does Kirill Kaprizov need to do in order to continue kind of his development? He's in the prime of his career right now. And so the only thing really for him is to continue to lead, continue to be the guy, be the dog that leads this franchise and wills them to win all of these games that they wouldn't otherwise have a chance in. That's all we need from him. The question is, who else is going to step up and follow suit? That is the $1 million question over these next couple of seasons around Kirill Kaprizov, is who are the guys that you can legitimately stack up behind Kirill that are going to help you win a Stanley Cup? And where are the spots that you need to go find help? Those are the two questions that are going to need to be answered by the time Kaprizov's current deal is done. Development is a huge piece of that because you've got prospects that we hope are going to be able to fill those spots and have enough intrigue to where their ceiling is not immediately known. And it could be that they profile as middle six guys, but there's top line upside with some of these prospects, especially offensively, that we have yet to see. But you need to see where they're at. You got to see where you're at with things. Because as we talked about on Friday, the clock is ticking. Every day the clock ticks. And so as far as Kaprizov goes, just continue to lead. And the Wild have to find out in quick order who is following and who is just kind of here. Again, this decision will have lasting impacts, whether Kaprizov stays, whether Kaprizov decides he's had enough and wants to go elsewhere. There will be impact felt for a long time after this. So Kaprizov gets an A from me. I mean, I really don't know what more you could ask for a guy to do, especially down the stretch. He just was on another planet in terms of productivity. So Kaprizov gets full A's from me, and I just hope that the franchise is able to show enough progress here to where he is intrigued enough to want to hang around and see what happens. But that's for Bill Guerin and Craig Leopold to answer. And so that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. We'll have a playlist of these coming up shortly here on YouTube. So if you miss one of our report card episodes, you can go through and view the entire series. So make sure to hit the like button before you head out here for today. And make sure if you're listening on one of our audio platforms, make sure to give us a review, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It helps with distribution. Every like, every comment helps with distribution of this show so that we can get seen by more Wild fans throughout the globe. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.